Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, Gary here for Bizarre Brain Comics. This is where I like to take a look at some older comics, talk about the characters and creators, and examine the stories and the art. Well, what I want to take a look at this time from Gold Key Comics. This is from 1969. Gold Key Comics number 12 of Ripleys Believe It or Not. True Ghost Stories is the subtitle. And let's see what I got in the big book of knowledge about Ripley's Believe It or Not. Everybody's heard of Ripley's Believe It or Not. Okay. Ripley's is one of the longest running comic panels in the history of the medium, in the newspaper. Whoa! It features unusual and unbelievable facts from around the world. It is currently illustrated by John Graziano. Would that be Graziano? And I haven't seen the panel in papers in years. Okay, Robert Ripley began his panel Champs and Chumps in the New York Globe on December 19th, 1918. So it's well over 100 years ago. It's 113 years ago. Which eventually became Believe It or Not. He searched the world, traveled to 21 countries in 35 years to find the weird and unusual to feature in his panel. Now that, and for decades they've had books, paperback books that reprinted. There's usually did it annually, and they'd reprint all the stuff from the previous year because it was just one panel, so you have one per page. And I used to read that one once in a while when I was a kid. But I haven't seen those. As far as I know, they still publish something reprinting that stuff. But I haven't seen any new ones in probably decades. And probably just about as long since I've seen even the old ones that reprinted stuff. So, but this book is about ghost stories. So, it's true, and it's labeled True Ghost Stories. And it's unusual stuff. Gold Key Comics had, for Gold Key Comics, Ripley's was an anthology mystery comic magazine. Number 1 started in 1965, and the title features stories based on myths and legends and allegedly true accounts of ghosts and demons and the supernatural. It was published through the 70s. I couldn't find an end date, but I remember seeing it through the 70s. Now I want to clarify, when they list as true ghost stories, what is true is that the stories and the legends that the comic uses, it's true that they are out there. It is, not necessarily true that the stories are actually true. Uh, if that makes any sense to you. It's true that the legend exists, but the legend is not necessarily true, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, and all the writers and artists were uncredited, and it was drawn from the usual stable of creators utilized by Gold Key. So, most of these artists in this I've seen elsewhere, and in all the mystery titles and other stuff, and I don't necessarily recognize. I recognize the art, but I don't necessarily know who the artist is. So let's have some spooky time and join Robert Ripley. Believe it or not. And here we have the cover. This issue we're looking at, number 12. Believe it or not, True Ghost Stories. Nice painted cover. Someone went, may not be able to see it here, but someone went to town on with a pen on the cover. So a lot of scribbles. And this is long before I had this. It says, weird, eerie, authentic, The Strangler Oak, and other stories. And this is what, okay, of course, Ripley's was also one of the featured titles in the DC, Gold Key Mystery Digest books. And reprinting these stories. So some of these stories I've probably seen before. Now, one thing, and it normally had painted covers like this. There's some great painted covers on all these mystery titles. And I want to show you another issue, which is very unusual because it has a photo cover. And it's probably from something from Ripley's. Now, Ripley's is a big industry now. They've had at least 2 television series, and they have, I think it said, 29 Ripley's museums around the world, and many of them here in the U.S. And which they just have displays and artifacts and stuff that go along with some of the stuff that because Robert Ripley, he traveled around the world, he would collect the stories, but he would also often collect artifacts. And now they have teams whose whole job is to go around the world looking for unusual stories and artifacts to go along with the stories. And so with all these museums, and they have publications, and the from what I understand, the panel is still going in the newspapers, although I haven't seen one in ages. But it's still out there, and it can be you can get it on online at their website. Just Ripley's Believe It or Not official website. Ripley's Believe It or Not. And this issue here says True Demons and Monsters. That's the only one I've ever seen that had the subtitle like that. True Demons and Monsters. I may have had it for a few issues, but these are from the same year. But it's usually true ghost stories. This in here has stories of some demon possession stuff, legendary creatures, because it wasn't so much ghost stories, and it's usually just spooky ghosty stories. And when they would write these up, they would put it into a story form. So sometimes they would have to create characters or change characters' names, and what else did they do? Embellish the story a little bit to put it into a story form, something that's more readable, and then make it spookier. So Ripley's Believe It or Not, and the story we're going to look at here is The Strangling Oak. The Strangling Oak. Now, I don't know who this artist is. I've seen his style before. I don't know. I recognize it, but I don't know who the artist is. And it's really nice. I think he's one of the European artists that they used, but I don't know that for sure. And this is The Strangling Oak. This is in medieval times. But you can see, as you can see here in this splash panel, it's some really nice draftsmanship. And here it got already kind of a spooky looking tree right next to him, even though that tree is not the one they're talking about. Because in the 14th century Wales, the famous chieftain Owen Glowendower and his cousin Howell Saley have been bitter rivals since childhood, and they've just been fighting with quarterstaves. And Glowendower, whatever heck his name is, Glendower has just beat his cousin. Bah! If I hadn't slipped, I would have beaten you, Owen. Oh yeah, they're bitter rivals, and they just kind of despise each other. And here's another comment when there's at a ball of some kind. Said each year their rivalry grows worse, and have now they're arguing because over who they think this lady happens to have been smiling at the time. And I said it's really nice draftsmanship in this panel. You can really see a lot because their dress, of course, indicate, and the fact that they're using quarterstaves indicate that it is medieval time, and then you can really show it with the castle here. And of course, it's the Strangling Oak. Have the spooky looking tree back here. And here is again nice. But here is just a lovely lady's face in the foreground, who is the one that they are arguing about. And I wonder if that was because the detail in the hair and the regalia she's wearing is really detailed and nice, and nicely rendered. So he must have had, I'm sure, had some a photo or historical reference for him. Well, here you see the abbot from the local church. He gets them together, tells them, put your feud aside, be friends. It's gonna, before it develops into a blood feud. Okay, well said. We'll be friends. No more arguing. Okay, blah blah blah. And Howell invites Owen to a hunt, and so they're there, and Owen's manservant says you can't trust him if you go alone with him into the forest for the hunt. And he says, I know, I'll keep my eye. I'm going to keep my eye on him. So they're riding alone out into the woods, and they're past this spooky tree, and says, those ghastly limbs, they're like an evil omen. Yeah, that's probably some of the embellishment there. And they go along through the hunt, and they see a stag, and Lowell is drawing his knocking an arrow on his bow, but instead of shooting the deer, he quickly turns and shoots his cousin. Floomt! Ha ha! Fool! So you thought I forgot our quarrel? Ha ha! And he falls off his horse. Again, it's real nicely rendered. Very slick, very professional. It's not as dynamic as some, but it's dynamic enough. It really tells the story well. But Lowell's treachery fails. Ha ha! I wore a mail shirt under my tunic. I'll finish you yet. And then they get to draw their swords and they're fighting. Da-da-da-da-da. But Owen is the victor. He manages to kill his cousin, who is the aggressor in this instance. But then, as he lays there dying, he curses him. And then Owen's manservant comes up said, "Oh, I was afraid of this, Lord Owen. That is why I followed," because he'd been followed him to keep an eye on him. But now he's dead, and we've got to hide the fact. We can't, because this will explode into a blood feud between our houses. So we can't just bury him, because we'll have to go. Everyone will have to go looking for him, and they'll find where we bury him. Now here's this old tree trunk, this old spooky looking tree, and got a hollow spot in it. So they stuff his body inside the tree. He goes back, tells everyone that they got separated, and so everyone's out looking for him, but no one can find him. Yada yada yada. And then days later, as Glendower peasants search for stray cattle at dusk, they come by the tree, and corpse lights. There's all these little green flames around there, and it appears that the whole thing bursts into flames, and then the spooky figure appears. "Oh, it's Howl! Run before he destroys us!" Blah blah blah. So it gets a bad reputation, spooky reputation. We'll have the Glendower tax collectors were out and returning to the castle, but they're going to be arriving late, so they stop and they to sleep for the night, and it just happens to be under this gnarled tree. And while they're sleeping, we don't see what happens, but later when they don't show up, people go out to look for them, and they find their strangled corpses there under the tree where they lay sleeping. "Look, their bodies and throats. It's as if they were crushed in a vice. Their clothes are torn and filled with bits of bark." And then they see bits of clothing, tattered bits of clothing in the tree branches, and the branches of the tree look like gnarled, strangling hands. Then Owen is haunted by his cousin's ghost. Says, "You are accursed, Glendower, you and all who serve you." On that, and Glendower keeps this a secret, but his conscience plays a toll on him, and he lays sick in bed, and he summons his faithful Mad Dog, and says, "My strength is going fast, but before I die, promise you'll tell Howell's widow where we hid his body." "It will be done, Lord Owen." But days later, Howell's remains are removed from the oak. Says, "So that's where the body was hidden. No wonder his specter haunted this tree," because they knew the legend of the spooky tree. "And the curse will be removed from that tree." Well then, sometimes short time later, another relative, they see that's a spook, it's a specter. But then years go by, and one of his distant relatives, his successor, coming to take the title, coming to the castle, and they're riding late. They have to take stop for the night, and they happen to take shelter under that spooky tree. So there they are, speaking under the spooky tree, and the one who is taking the title happens to have bear a strong resemblance to Owen, who is now dead. So during the night, he happens to wake up and see the limbs of the tree reaching for his throat. For both of them, and he screams and gets up, but he manages to get away, but his companion doesn't. "What a fool I am! I was only a dream. I hope I didn't wake William." And he goes back, and his friend is in the clutches of the tree, dead as he's being strangled. "Help! Help! Help!" Runs for help. He gets to the castle, and he takes his position and everything. He gets his men to come back, and they chop down that spooky old tree. So, because the curse was still in place. The tree was leveled, only the rotting stump remained. But for centuries afterward, wanderers passed it in fear, trembling at the curse of the strangling oak. Believe it or not. Well, I believe that the legend is true. That there is a legend, but I don't believe that the legend is true. It's a legend. And that was just one story. Each issue usually had like 4 stories. There's a Death Spectral Hand, which tells the story of this boy. His mother keeps having images of the boy's hand being a bloody claw as he's growing up, and eventually, even when he goes to a fortune teller when he's grown up in college, and she sees the bloody claw of his hand, and he's poo-poos everything, poo-poos it. But it turns out, here we see the guy creeping up with a gun in hand, bursts in this door as he is John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Now, I've never heard of that before. I've heard of some other legends, but not that one. The Ghostly Horseman. So you can see all nice, slick artwork, different artists on each story. And I don't know who these artists are, or who wrote the story. Ghostly Horseman, lady accidentally being dragged to death. Then keep seeing the ghost. It appears to be the ghostly image of this lady being dragged to death by a horse. And then the headless ghost of Hallie Hollow. And people at night, storm breaks, they take refuge in this old cabin. Then they're haunted by a headless ghost. He says, "No." And the ghost tells them the story of how people thought he had some gold, and they bust in and they harass him and eventually kill him and chop his head off, and said his spirit will not rest until his head is reunited. They search and they find the skull of his head, and they find where the body is buried, and they bury the skull with the body, and then burn the house down. Everything's hunky-dory then. And no more spook. And that's just a sample of Ripley's Believe It or Not. And some enjoyable books and stories that ran for many years. And it's, if you've never read any of them, they're worth a look. Find some in the dollar box. And even check out the Ripley's Believe It or Not website, or find some of the old Believe It or Not reprints and paperback. It's because they have a lot of interesting little tidbits. So that's all I've got. Please, well, thank you for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, and remember, comics are art. Believe it or not.